Good morning, everyone. I'm Asha Swami. We're continuing our fireside chats. Our theme right now is the gurus of this path of self-realization. And today we're going to be talking about Paramhansa Yogananda, Master, as we always call him. So let's begin with the prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to open our hearts to your presence, that we may know you as a living reality. Convey to us the vibration of your consciousness, that we may be uplifted into the light and walk with full awareness of your presence within. We are your children, you are our mother. Guide us and bless us and bring us safely home to thee. Om. Peace. Amen. Many people who come onto this path are drawn entirely by Master, as I'm going to call him, meaning Yogananda. And the rest of them are sort of there, and you don't really quite know what to do with them. And one of the reasons that I've been giving this series is just to help us expand our understanding. But there's no specific reason why you have to feel all of them equally. It's only a potential that you can feel. All of us have a particular affinity in a particular way. Some people who come to this path are actually most deeply drawn to Jesus or to Babaji, but this is the path through which they can access them. Swamiji talks about in various places. I can't conjure up exact sources, but it's a principle that he's talked about it many times. Is that the latest representative in time, and I'm not talking about religious organization. I'm not talking about the present pope versus popes that came before. I'm talking about the traditions of looking to the saints to define what spirituality is. Swami wrote a book about Christianity, which he called The Revelations of Christ. Master wrote a commentary on the Bible that was more verse by verse and pulling out specific sections and talking about it. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Master actually went stanza by stanza. So when Swami commented on the Bhagavad Gita, he went stanza by stanza through the book, just as Master did. But when he wrote a commentary on the Bible, he felt it was more important to establish the basic way to approach the Bible so that we could understand what Jesus taught. And what he said there is that those that we should listen to about the lives of the saints are those who share their consciousness. But when a new avatar comes, as God sends them periodically, or a great representative of an avatar, a great disciple, their message also brings to a clearer focus often revelations of the past that in one way or another have become corrupted by time. Because human minds, even with sincere intention, try to bring clarity to the teachings of their masters, but unless they are following the principles that Swami outlines in Revelations of Christ, often with good intention, they totally muddy the water. I think I've shared with you even in this series how my friend, the Episcopal priest, actually asserted that the teachings of Jesus only were revealed over some 300 centuries or longer. And that was like the orthodox theology of Christianity that he had absorbed in his advanced degree from a prestigious university. I proposed to him that was preposterous, that Jesus, as a fully self-realized master, knew far better than anybody who came after him, who had much lower states of consciousness, what he intended and what he meant. So what happens is that the teachings get confused. And it's not evil. Sometimes it's evil. Sometimes people become infatuated with power and position, and also even with personal profit and egoic recognition. And their motives for reinterpreting the teachings are quite corrupt. But sometimes it's just sincere, and people are acting to the limits of their ability. So, in our line of teaching, in this particular line of masters, we have the origin point of it, which is Jesus coming to Babaji. And the fact of these masters, their true reality is they take visible form for a time, but when they leave their physical form, the responsibility that the avatar feels for the ongoing well-being of the disciples who are drawn to him after he leaves the body, and seemingly in the case of this line of masters, an ongoing responsibility for the, even literally for the evolution of the planet. The mere fact of being in or out of a body doesn't change that. And as I spoke of it, Babaji is unusual because he's maintained his physical form through millennia. Even though he's not visible to most people, he can manifest that body, and in some ways that I don't understand. Jesus lives without a body, even though he can appear in vision to his disciples. Babaji continues to inhabit a physical body. I'm frankly just giving you words that I learned from Autobiography of a Yogi that seem like good words to me, but to say that I actually know what I'm talking about is that I don't. I'm talking through my hat, but we have to have a conversation, so we're having it. But however it is defined and understood, Jesus and Babaji are still responsible for what's going on in this world. They're still taking an active interest in it. You might put it like, although it isn't exactly like if a man founds a company and then turns it over to his sons, he may still keep a watchful eye on it. And in fact, he may even still guide his sons, if his sons are receptive to it, to make sure that it stays the way it's supposed to stay, although he might be stepped back from it. So Jesus and Babaji um, have been watching the evolution of this planet coming out of Kali Yuga, moving into Dwapara. Dwapara Yuga, when I first read about the yugas and heard about the yugas, oh, Kali Yuga is the lowest age. It's the age of fixed matter. Dwapara Yuga is the age of energy. We're coming into a new age, and especially in the 60s and the 70s, when society was really shifting its direction, at least the corner of it in which I was deeply involved. You know, I was one of the earliest in my crowd to drop out of college, and we were just pioneering this wholly new way of life, which has become, a chapter in history books now, how the baby boomers, shifted the direction of society, which in fact, I guess we did. A whole lot of things that are now mainstream actually began at that point. Swami has often given this illustration about how society has changed. He said, most people just walk down the center of what's ever happening. But every so often, he said, usually a group of people is inspired to move off to the side and creates a different vortex of energy. The Renaissance in Florence was that, and the transcendental writers in New England had that kind of influence. Gertrude Stein and the left bank writers in Paris, the Russian Revolution, but also my generation, some of my generation, we moved over here. We went back to the land. We started talking about attunement to nature. We talked about vegetarianism. We talked about husbanding resources. We talked about spirituality versus religion, all of these things. Society is flowing in a straight line, and a group of people go off to the side and create a whirlpool. And if there is enough magnetism, if it's destiny, and if there is enough magnetism, society itself gradually moves over and begins to run right through that whirlpool. I mean, in my relatively short life, one life is very short, when I became a vegetarian, in 19, whatever it would have been, 66 or 67, one of my relatives was so concerned about my health and well-being that they made me write down everything that I was eating and submit it to a doctor. And at that time, I was not only a vegetarian, I was a health food nut. And so the diet that I submitted to the doctor, thank you, God, he pronounced as the healthiest diet he had ever seen and predicted I would live to be 150. So that kind of silenced the opposition. I mean, I could have gotten a completely different answer, but that's the answer that I got. But now vegetarianism is just passé. You've got to be a vegan, and you have to be even more than just a vegan. You have to only eat plants that grow on the west side of the slope and are harvested, in the sunset by barefoot indigenous people, to really make an impact on the diet scene. But I was the lunatic fringe when I started. And meditation was just unheard of. And Indian gurus, it was so far off to the edge of the planet. And of course, I live in California. I live in California. I live in Northern California. I live in Palo Alto. I live in an Ananda community. So to say that I breathe rarefied air is putting it very mildly. I took seclusion, and I'm not casting aspersions. I'm just saying it. Just saying. I took seclusion in the cabin of a friend right up by the Canadian border in the middle of the state of Washington. Suffice to say, it is not Northern California, Palo Alto, or an Ananda community. It's a very, very different world there. So I know that my world is not normal. But in the world that I live in, either people do meditate or they feel guilty because they don't. I mean, that is an incredible, think about that, from it just being completely unknown to the point where people know they ought to do it. So it's not only known, but its reputation, its beneficial reputation is huge. That's happened just in the matter of a few decades, because this is how change really happens. And the government never passed a program that said thou shalt meditate, you know, thou shalt be vegan. And just it doesn't come from the top down. Change actually comes swelling up as a wave of consciousness from the bottom up, which is why whenever we talk about what we're doing, especially in light of the present chaos on the planet, we say to people, do not ever for a minute feel, one, that you're helpless in the face of fate, or that you have no influence, because it's consciousness coming up from the bottom. By that I mean it's the grassroots, it's the genuine grassroots consciousness that creates destiny. And by the time the government even knows it's happening, a friend of mine, this is all about Yogananda, we'll get there, and of course we have all the time in the world, so we can just do whatever we want. But a friend of mine, Michael Toms, who I passed away maybe a year or two ago. Michael Toms was the founder of something called New Dimensions Radio, and that was in the 60s and the 70s. And New Dimensions Radio became so important. I learned this when I actually read his obituary, that the archives from his years and years of radio programs, and then his wife also took over, Justine took over, has become like a precious historical record of the transformation of world culture, because Michael took it upon himself very early. He could see what was happening. And over the course of time, like every Saturday night, he would do these interview programs. And basically every innovative thinker in the world, of course, then it was physical. They had to get all the way to San Francisco and get into his studio. But every innovative thinker in the world eventually came to San Francisco and would appear on his program, sometimes more than once. And he was a brilliant interviewer, and he would draw out of them exactly what the message that they had to deliver. So he documented the whole New Age. New Dimensions is what he called it, which was a brilliant name too. He documented the whole evolution of revolutionary thought. And Swami Kriyananda appeared on his show several times. And Michael also helped Ananda, the entire, the launch of Swami's book, The Path. Michael managed that for us and guided us and helped us do it. It was the first really highly professional effort we'd made to publish a book. And I personally went to it. I was trained by him. He taught me about promotions and publicity and many aspects of that so that I knew him. So let me think now, what was the point of that? Oh, this is what was the point. Um, at a certain point in the midst of all of this, see now you have to understand there was just like it was a different era then. We were very sure about what we were doing. That's people who are creating revolutions. And I don't mean that we were out there flaming like this, but we were creating an inward revolution, and we knew we were. People who are creating revolutions often have a very strong sense of the rightness of what they're doing. Ideally, and thank you to Swami Kriyananda, because he was very, very careful in this, we didn't have any sense of self-importance about what we were doing. We just knew we were doing something that was worth doing. That would be the way I would put it, quite simply. And certainly my commitment to it was exceedingly personal, which is I was looking for meaning and purpose in my life, and I was looking for something I could believe in wholeheartedly so that I could give my energy to it without always feeling that in some way I was compromising. And Swami Kriyananda was that for me. And then he introduced me to Yogananda, and everything else followed. But I, um, I can't overemphasize, just speaking for myself, the extraordinary relief and sense of freedom that gave me. And that's sort of what I meant by just um, by those who are creating a revolution, knowing what we're doing. When you read about, interestingly, about the founders of America, they knew what they were doing. They could feel it. They were guided by God. There's no other word for it. They knew what they were doing. I want to come back to that eventually about Master, about the American Revolution. But in any case, at some point in all of that, in those very early years, I guess it was Time magazine or maybe Newsweek magazine. I feel like I have to say these things. This was in the era when magazines were the primary way that people communicated. Paper, it's only been in the very last few years that paper communication has become so insignificant. But in most of my life, paper communication was the way things were done, and magazines, especially these weekly news magazines, were the definitive vehicle for defining American life, not my lunatic fringe, but American life. And somewhere in there, somebody on the staff of one of those magazines heard that some people thought a new age was happening. And so the cover of Newsweek magazine or Time magazine was about the new age. Here, the new age is coming. So that week, Michael Toms on his New Dimensions radio says, look, he said, Time magazine has noticed, that there's a new age coming. He said, we started at that point 5 years ago with his program. We started 5 years ago, he said, and Newsweek, 5 years later, has finally caught up to what's happening. And then Michael got very serious. And he said, seriously, folks, we've got to be more than 5 years ahead of Time magazine. If the mainstream can catch up to us that quickly, we're not doing our job. And he was right. Of course, we were way ahead of Time magazine, but the fact that they even knew we were there was like a remarkable thing. I believe since then they've forgotten, and or we have moved into the mainstream. We've moved into the center of what they're doing. I mean, Marianne Williamson was actually a candidate for president this year, in the before it narrowed down, but she was out there speaking a completely different truth. She's a representative in her way of the whole thing that started all that long time ago. So what is happening on the planet is these pulses of expanding awareness. And no, I want to go all the way back to Dwapara Yuga. I can see this can go on for several days. Going all the way back to Dwapara Yuga, when we first sort of entered into this story and began to find out that we were no longer in Kali Yuga and that all the mess that the world was in was all because of Kali Yuga, and now we were out of Kali Yuga. Hallelujah, we're out of Kali Yuga. It began to transition in 1700, and in 1900, Dwapara Yuga proper began, and we could say goodbye to Kali Yuga, and that was that. And we thought we were home free, and we were out there in the woods, and we're creating this totally new society on a totally new basis. And we basically thought tomorrow it would be done, just like that. But gradually, over time, as we've studied and learned more, and had gotten more than a superficial understanding, I've learned extremely disconcerting things. The first disconcerting thing I learned was that war continues all the way through Dwapara Yuga. And Dwapara Yuga is like 2,400 years in length. And starting from 1900, war continues. Now, if you stop and think for a minute, any planet that can still go to war lacks a certain intelligence and a certain refinement, a certain raised consciousness that I would not call synonymous with a new age. And in fact, even worse, Dwapara Yuga is one of the most insecure ages that you can go through, because there is this tremendous advance in technological capability, which is exactly what we're seeing now. But moral and spiritual development, although it also advances, does not advance quite fast enough to tell, so that people have the technological capacity not only to wage war, but in Kali Yuga, at least, when people go to war, it's one man with some big hard object in his hand, and he's hacking away at another man with another big hard object in their hands, and everybody else can just kind of go about their business. Then you get guns, then you get cannons, then you get bombs, then you get nuclear bombs, then you get, God knows, we don't even know what we can get. Now we can do targeted drone attacks. And so no corner of the earth is safe. And no individual quietly going about his business is necessarily safe, because the destructive power of technology can reach anywhere on the globe. And people don't necessarily, all people don't necessarily have the moral fiber not to do it. Wow, that is really, really, really not the new age I was thinking about. The new age I was thinking about was real different. I remember having a conversation with Swamiji, complaining about this world that we were in. I know that I have lots of karma still to work out, have had lots of karma. I don't know how much more I have. I hope less. I hope it's certainly less than when I started. But I know I incarnated because Swami incarnated. I mean, the reason I came here now it's self-evident, was to be with him, because all I did was sort of hold my breath and stand against the wall until I met him. And then the instant I met him, the direction of my life was set and has never altered. I mean, you can do reverse engineering on that one and figure out why I'm here. But this is not a very congenial age, really. I remember Devarshi. I think we were in Nevada City, and there was a movie theater, and they were showing, I'm going to say, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is kind of to me, a generic title for some horrible thing that, of course, I never exposed myself to. Maybe something even worse, fiendish things from somewhere come and torture everyone, watch it in 3D kind of movie. And Devarshi, just in his very quiet way, says to me, imagine, he said, a planet in which they make movies like that, and we're living on it. And it was like, yeah, how did we ever get here? So I remember sitting with Swamiji saying, sir, you know, if you come back, I'm probably going to have to come back with you. I mean, that's just what's going to happen. Do you think we could just come in a higher age? Do we have to do this again? Swami's first response was very interesting. Well, it was multiple. At that point in time, Swami was insisting that once he got free, he was never coming back. Later in his life, he amended that with words like, well, I know myself, he said. I know that I'm going to feel compassion and I'm going to come back, which was more like him. But at that point, the first thing he said was, I don't ever plan to come back. But that was kind of a low moment. He came out of that. And then he said, even in a higher age, he said, it's still the material world. It's not spiritual freedom. But he said, in a higher age, he said, people like us are in charge. And I said, so the whole world is like Ananda? He said, yes, the whole world is like Ananda. In other words, whatever technological advances we have, we also have the spiritual and moral understanding to know what to do with those things. And instead of using them to wreck our life experience, we use them to enhance it. However, this is not where we are, because why would the masters only come when things are peachy keen? And in fact, what is going to make the world into a better place? It is the rising awareness coming through the individual consciousness. We have history to show this. Um, Master said he was William the Conqueror in a previous incarnation, and it's interesting to study it historically. There's a book called Two Souls, Four Lives, which Catherine Kairavi wrote, and it's about Yogananda as William and Kriyananda as his son Henry. Two souls, four lives. And it's all about what the influence of that incarnation was and how it really set the planet in a certain direction, the benefits of which we are still reaping, including the making of England, resulted in the making of America as the Dwapara Yuga country in which Master could incarnate in order to bring these teachings at this time. Because we have this Jesus appeared to the great Master Babaji, but we don't have any idea when that was. We don't know when that energy was set in motion that resulted in Master. And I mean, I have no reason to say this, but was that before Master came as William? Was all of that part of this, or was it yesterday and then Lahiri meets Babaji? I can't answer these questions, but what I'm trying to do, even by raising them, is to just take our understanding and step way back from our little tunnel vision and just see what was happening. But when Master was William, Sri Yukteswar incarnated with him as Lanfranc. Lanfranc was his spiritual advisor. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury. He was a very great spiritual figure. And Lanfranc started this monastery called Cluny in France. And this was a time when the Catholic Church, which was in the West, the Catholic Church was the custodian of the teachings of Jesus, and Jesus as the avatar to the West, he was the custodian truly of Sanatan Dharma. And the true revelation of Jesus was always existent and accessible to the saints who had the consciousness to understand it. The mere fact that was being eaten by the institution of the church did not in any way corrupt the revelation. Even to this day, that's the truth. There's always two realities. There's the institutional reality, and then there's the direct perception. So Lanfranc started this monastery, 12 monks, at a time when the church was completely corrupt. My friend who did the historical research, all of Western civilization was eventually transformed from the Cluny monastery. And they trained and influenced every significant spiritual leader for several centuries after that. 12 monks, all by themselves, but following a spiritual master, and truly following that spiritual master, the entire direction of a civilization is changed. You see, the real power is with the saints. Wow, is that the good news? Because if the real power was with the politicians, we would be in trouble. No, no, no. They're instruments of the karma of the people, but the real power is with the saints. So, tomorrow we'll go on about Yogananda's role and how all of this unfolded. God bless you.